At 6:22 on a Monday morning, the display on our kitchen wall told me my wife had a 6-year anniversary dinner with a man named Graham. Celia had left 20 minutes earlier for what she called a 3-day grocery audit in Duluth. I was rinsing her coffee mug when the screen changed from weather to her schedule and showed a green event marked Graham, 6 years, same room, 7:30 p.m. Beneath it was a blue reminder for Thursday, Nolan home 9:40, Tel G, Cedar Rapids. I stood close enough to see that neither event belonged to our shared household calendar. The green calendar was labeled G home. The blue one was N home. Celia had replaced her phone the night before and reconnected it to the wall display so our grocery list would sync. Somehow, 2 calendars I had never seen came with it. I did not ask the display to open messages, contacts, or private files. I photographed what was already visible in our kitchen, then touched the screen once to see the week view. Tuesday held the anniversary dinner at the Harvest Room Hotel in Madison. Thursday held Nolan's flight number and an arrival time in Cedar Rapids. Friday showed buffer 90 minutes at 4:15, then Victor, Fleet Banquet, 6 o'clock. My name is Victor Lane. I was 47, supervised maintenance for a municipal vehicle fleet outside Milwaukee, and had been married to Celia for 19 years. I knew her audit territory, her preferred hotels, the restaurants that made her sick, and the names of managers who called during recalls. I did not know Graham or Nolan. I called Celia before I let the screen show me anything else. She answered through the car speakers. "Did you add work calendars to the kitchen display?" I asked. "Maybe." The phone restore was a mess. "Why? Who is Graham?" There was no road noise for several seconds. Then she said, "Graham Pike owns the Harvest Room. I handled its reopening review. Why are you celebrating 6 years with him in the same room? 6 years since the property reopened. That note sounds weird without context. What is G home?" Celia said she needed to pull over. I heard the turn signal, then silence. "Victor, do not go through those calendars. They are on the wall in our kitchen. They are client schedules. You could expose confidential audit information. Then explain N home and why Nolan's arrival requires you to tell Graham you're in Cedar Rapids." Celia said nothing. The display went black while I held the phone. A moment later it restarted with only weather and our grocery list. She had removed the account remotely. I asked why confidential client calendars had been connected to a household screen in the first place. She said the phone had restored every account automatically. Later I confirmed that a restore could reconnect previously authorized calendar feeds, but no device could invent event names or 6 years of entries. The technical explanation accounted for the exposure, not the content. "I'm coming back," she said. "Don't do anything until I get there." The command clarified more than the explanations had. I took the day off and sat at the kitchen table with the photograph I had already taken. Celia and I had no children. Our marriage had been built around 2 careers with unpredictable hours, my widowed father's needs before he died, and an easy assumption that work travel required trust rather than constant verification. For the last 4 years of my father's life, Celia handled appointments I could not leave work to attend and knew which neurologist would return a call. When he died, she sat beside me through the funeral and stayed awake the first night because I kept thinking I heard his medical alert button. Those nights were part of why I never translated her travel into suspicion. I did not yet know that the worst lie on the screen had been built from them. Celia was 45 and a regional food safety auditor for a grocery and restaurant group. Her legitimate territory covered Wisconsin, northern Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota. She sometimes left Sunday night and returned Friday. I had traveled with her twice and had seen how exhausting the job could be: pre-dawn inspections, cold storage rooms, managers angry about violations, and reports written after dinner. Her schedule was not a cover story invented from nothing. It was a real job wide enough to hide other lives inside. I opened only systems we owned jointly. Our shared airline points account showed 5 companion redemptions I had not noticed because Celia usually managed travel rewards. 3 tickets went to Graham Pike over the previous 4 years. 2 went to Nolan Brooks. The destinations were not romantic resorts: Chicago, Minneapolis, and St. Louis. That made them easier to label as conferences. The points had come from both of our cards, including mine. One Chicago redemption fell on the weekend. Celia said a refrigeration failure had contaminated 2 grocery freezers. I remembered her calling from a loading dock while alarms sounded behind her. The emergency had been real, a trade bulletin still described the recall. What I had not known was that Graham flew in after the inspection ended. Another redemption matched a Minneapolis trip when Celia brought me a hotel pen and complained that she spent her birthday alone. The records did not tell me what happened in either city, but they proved that work truth and personal lies had traveled together. Our joint checking showed no obvious hotels or gifts. Each of us transferred a fixed personal allowance monthly, and Celia received legitimate travel reimbursements from work. I could see how secrecy might fit between those lines without assuming her employer paid for it. The photo and companion tickets established enough to require answers. I wrote the visible names, times, and calendar labels on one sheet, then put the photograph away. Calling the hotel or reaching for Celia's private accounts might produce more pain without changing what I needed to do before she returned. The restraint did not calm me. It kept the panic from choosing my next move. Celia returned at 8:11 carrying the laptop bag she had left with. She had not made it to Duluth. I placed the photograph and the 5 redemptions on the table. She looked first at the blue calendar, not the anniversary. "Nolan is a consultant," she said. "Graham was an affair. It ended. The anniversary is tomorrow. We were going to talk. In the same room?" Her mouth tightened. I asked how long. She said 18 months. I pointed to 6 years. The restaurant reopened 6 years ago. NG home. A label. Nothing more. Why does Nolan's arrival need a story for Graham? Celia pulled out a chair. Because Graham is jealous and Nolan works with me. The explanation tried to make one secret relationship prove the innocence of the second. I asked 4 questions that affected immediate decisions: whether either man had entered our house, whether both relationships were physical, whether she had used joint money beyond the points, and whether I needed medical testing. She said neither had entered the house. Graham had been physical but Nolan had not. The companion tickets were the only shared asset, and testing would be sensible. I asked whether she was currently with Graham. It isn't that simple. Is tomorrow's dinner cancelled? She looked at the table. Not yet. I told her to pack for a week. Celia asked whether I intended to call both men. I said I did not know who Nolan was and had no reason to seek him out. Graham may contact you, she said. Why would a restaurant client contact your husband? She closed her eyes. After a long pause, she admitted Graham believed we had been separated for years. She still would not say what Nolan believed. Celia said I was treating a calendar sync mistake as a complete account of our marriage. I said the mistake was the sync, the events required 6 years of choices. She began to cry and said she loved me. I believed the emotion and still asked her to leave. Before she went, she opened her laptop at my request and disconnected every personal account from the kitchen display while I watched without asking for passwords. She would keep her private calendars. I would keep the photograph of what had appeared in our home. At 10:43, a man named Graham Pike called my work number. He said Celia had told him the calendars crossed, and he needed to know whether she and I were actually divorced. The question proved that the green calendar held more than restaurant audits. It also opened a larger one: if Graham thought I was an ex-husband, who did Nolan think I was? I moved the call from my work line to my personal phone. Celia and I are married, and we have never separated, I said. I'll answer what affects your decisions, but I don't want details about the two of you. Graham took a breath and said, fair. Graham was 50, owned the Harvest Room restaurant and adjoining 12-room hotel in Madison, and had known Celia since she conducted a food safety review before the property reopened. He said their relationship became physical 6 years earlier, not 18 months. He knew Celia was legally married to me. He believed we had separated privately in 2020 while continuing to share a house because my father was dying and neither of us wanted to force a sale. My father had died in 2021. According to Celia, I struggled afterward, and she postponed filing because removing the house and marriage would destabilize me. Graham had accepted that explanation for 2 more years. After my father's funeral, Graham gave Celia a condolence card addressed to me but did not sign his last name because he believed I knew him as her partner. I never received it. He also agreed not to attend public events with her near Milwaukee because she said seeing them together might trigger a crisis. The story made his discretion feel compassionate and made my continued presence evidence of fragility rather than marriage. Then Celia told him I was dating someone else but refused to formalize the divorce because of my municipal pension. None of that was true. Graham did not call himself innocent. I stopped asking for proof because every answer let me keep what I wanted, he said. He had ignored what protected the life he wanted. That did not make him part of Celia's plan. He believed he was Celia's exclusive partner. She kept clothes in a locked cabinet at the harvest room, attended staff holiday dinners, helped Graham choose menus, and spent most Tuesday nights there when she reported Madison inspections. Their 6-year anniversary dinner was booked in the same corner suite where the relationship began after the reopening gala. Graham had ordered the same wine and requested the same server from their first anniversary. He described those details, then stopped and apologized. I told him the reservation mattered because it proved the relationship was current, the menu did not. He needed to know whether he had been waiting for a divorce that was never coming. I needed dates I could compare with our money and my health risk. Neither answer required us to make the other man watch the relationship. Graham asked whether I knew Nolan Brooks. I said I had seen the name only on the display and companion tickets. He said Celia described Nolan as an independent cold chain consultant whose flights she sometimes coordinated. During the previous 3 years, every period when Celia was distant from Graham had been attached to Nolan's projects. Graham had once asked whether Nolan was another relationship. Celia laughed, showed him a photograph of Nolan wearing a conference badge beside 2 colleagues, and said jealousy was making him paranoid. "Do you have anything you can lawfully share?" I asked. Graham said he had his own calendar, travel confirmations for trips he took with Celia, and messages she sent him about our supposed separation. I asked him not to send intimate conversations or photographs. Dates and statements about my status were enough. He emailed a 1-page timeline and 3 travel receipts bearing his name. The dates matched green entries visible in my photograph and 3 of the shared points redemptions. He also forwarded 1 message from Celia written 4 months earlier, "Victor knows we're done. He just needs the house until the pension review." Graham had responded by asking for a filing date. Celia wrote after fall. It was June. No pension review existed. Graham said there had always been another season attached to the future, after winter bookings, after spring inspections, after the summer patio opened. The words changed while the delay remained. He had begun to suspect Celia preferred the promise of leaving to the cost of leaving. I scheduled medical testing and met with a family law attorney, Aaron Cho, the following morning. Aaron told me not to empty accounts, contact Celia's employer, or assume personal account spending was legally irrelevant. I should preserve the visible calendar photo, joint travel records, and voluntary material Graham had supplied. I should not impersonate Celia to recover removed calendars or demand passwords. We documented balances and agreed that I would answer Graham or Nolan only if doing so served health, money, or a practical decision. Celia emailed me that afternoon. She admitted the relationship with Graham had lasted 6 years but insisted Nolan was not romantic. She said Graham's insecurity forced her to make the blue calendar look domestic so he would stop searching her work schedule. That explanation made no sense. A false calendar named in home would increase risk, not reduce it. I replied with one question: was your relationship with Nolan ever physical? She did not answer. The next morning, Nolan Brooks sent a message to my personal email. Celia had given him my address after telling him the sink exposed an old marriage that existed only on paper. Nolan wrote that he was 42, lived in Cedar Rapids, and had been in an exclusive relationship with Celia for 3 years. He believed she had been widowed. Celia told him her husband Victor died after a long neurological illness in 2020, and that she kept his surname professionally. I read that sentence twice. Graham had been told I was fragile and financially dependent. Nolan had been told I was dead. At our house, I was alive, paying half the mortgage, making Celia's coffee, and listening to stories about audits. I replied that I was alive, still legally married, and had never separated. Nolan asked to speak once. Aaron approved a bounded video call with my sister Renee present off camera. Nolan looked younger than Graham and more frightened than angry. He worked in logistics software, not cold chain consulting, and met Celia at a grocery distribution conference. Their relationship became physical within 4 months. Nolan said he had been cautious about dating someone who traveled constantly. Celia answered his concern by sharing the blue calendar, giving him a predictable Thursday every month and longer trips planned a quarter ahead. What he experienced as reassurance was the system that protected the other relationships from him. She spent one Thursday and Friday with him most months and took 2 longer trips a year. He had visited what he believed was her Milwaukee home only through video. Celia always called from our guest room, angling the camera toward a blank wall. She said it was the room she kept after my death because the rest of the house contained too many memories. On video, Nolan had seen the lamp my father built and a framed photograph turned face down on the desk. Celia said the photograph was of me and that she could not remove it yet. The frame actually held a picture of my father. She had placed truth in the background and changed only the identity attached to it. Nolan had never met her relatives. He knew Graham's name but believed he was a demanding restaurant client. When Nolan once saw a green heart beside Graham in a notification, Celia said the symbol marked high-risk accounts. Nolan shared no private messages beyond one screenshot that directly concerned me. In it, he had asked why no obituary for Victor Lane appeared online. Celia replied that my family kept the death private and that pressing for proof made her grief feel like an interrogation. Nolan apologized to her. He said the unanswered obituary question embarrassed him for months, so he stopped raising inconsistencies and tried to become the person she trusted. Like Graham, he had mistaken his willingness not to verify for kindness. The cruelty of that lie was different from the affair itself. My father had actually died after a neurological illness. Celia had taken the details of his decline and assigned them to me because the story already existed in her memory. I asked Nolan whether the Thursday event on the blue calendar meant he was flying to Cedar Rapids. He said yes. Celia had planned to spend Thursday night with him, then return Friday afternoon for my municipal fleet banquet. The buffer 90-minute entry ended 15 minutes before I expected her at the banquet. It gave her time to change clothes, move luggage to her car, and shift from one version of herself to another. He also confirmed that home was the calendar she shared with him. Graham's green calendar, Nolan's blue calendar, and our white household calendar were not work labels. They were 3 relationship systems. The central question changed again. I was no longer asking whether Celia had one affair and a suspicious client. I was asking how long she had intended to keep all 3 lives active and whether there were more calendars I had never seen. Nolan sent a 2-page date list and copies of the 2 companion tickets issued in his name. He did not send photographs, sexual details, or messages unrelated to my status. Graham did the same. Their dates revealed a pattern the single-week view had only hinted at. Celia normally spent Tuesday nights with Graham, one Thursday and Friday each month with Nolan, and the remaining weekends with me. Longer audit trips contained personal extensions at either end. The buffer entries appeared before transitions between households, not before ordinary inspections. She built 90 minutes for driving, showers, luggage changes, and explanations if one trip ran late. Red blocks marked days when none of us should call because she claimed to be inside restricted facilities. In reality, some red blocks were legitimate audits. Others were travel overlap. The system worked because truth and deception used the same color. One red block covered the night my father was admitted to hospice. Celia had been at the hospital with me until 8, then said a refrigerated truck recall required an early drive to Madison. Graham's timeline showed she reached the harvest room before 10. She returned to the hospice the next morning with coffee and sat beside my father until noon. Both visits were real. The hidden calendar did not erase the care she gave, it showed how quickly she could cross from one relationship into another without letting either person know what the transition meant. That discovery made me stop measuring betrayal only by hours away from home. The deeper violation was that everyone's memories depended on information she alone possessed. Neither man knew the other existed as a partner. Each knew a different false version of me. Graham believed I was an ex-husband she protected. Nolan believed I was dead. I believed they were names inside a job I had no reason to audit. I met Celia 4 days after the sink in Aaron's conference room. She brought her own attorney, page 11. Before the meeting, Aaron and I reduced the 2 timelines to 1 page. We included only dates tied to health exposure, joint points, and Celia's statements about my status. I removed 3 entries that were merely painful. The act of removing them helped me understand that evidence and injury were not identical categories. I used only the photograph, the joint points records, and the bounded timelines Graham and Nolan had voluntarily provided. Celia looked at Nolan's name and whispered, "He contacted you?" Both of them did. She asked what they had sent. I said enough to establish dates, money, and the stories told about me. I would not exchange private messages for punishment. Aaron asked whether Celia wanted to answer personal questions before discussing temporary finances. She said yes. "Are there any other partners?" I asked. "No." "Are Graham and Nolan both current?" "Yes." "Both physical?" Celia looked down. "Yes." "Did you consider either relationship exclusive?" She rubbed her palms against her skirt. "They were separate. That wasn't a question. I didn't use the same parts of my life with them." I asked whether she ever intended to leave our marriage. Celia said she had considered it during the first year with Graham, then again after meeting Nolan, but every version required destroying something she valued. "So your solution was to let 3 men consent to different facts?" "I never thought of it like that." "You built 3 calendars." She said the calendars began as a way to prevent work conflicts. Graham wanted advance plans. Nolan traveled. I needed to know when she would be home. At first she copied events manually, then created separate shared calendars because one man's reminders could appear while she was with another. "It was logistics," she said. "Logistics for what?" Celia looked at her attorney. Paige told her she did not have to answer. Celia did anyway. "For not hurting anyone until I knew what I wanted." The timeline showed she had maintained the system for 6 years. I asked what additional information she expected to receive before choosing. She started crying and said she loved us differently. Graham made her feel admired. Nolan made her feel unburdened by history. I made her feel safe. "Did any of us know we were sharing you?" I asked. Celia said no. She admitted that when Graham pressed for a future, she spent more time with Nolan. When Nolan questioned her past, she returned to Graham. When either relationship became unstable, she came home and concentrated on us. She had interpreted the relief of switching relationships as proof that none of them should end. Paige asked whether she wanted a break. Celia said no and finally stated the fact I needed. She had no planned date to leave me, Graham, or Nolan before the calendars appeared. The explanation was incomplete and probably as honest as she could manage. She had not been waiting for facts. She had been using each relationship to avoid the cost of the others. I asked about money. Celia estimated she had spent roughly $14,000 from personal allowances and bonuses on gifts, personal trip extensions, and meals. The shared points had paid 5 companion tickets. She denied using employer funds for romantic travel, falsifying audit results, opening debt, changing beneficiaries, or acquiring property with either man. Later financial review found no secret residence, loan, company, or insurance policy. Several hotel nights began after legitimate work concluded, and Celia had paid the extensions herself. I had no evidence that her employer's clients or reimbursements were defrauded, so I did not create an employment scandal to make the consequences feel larger. Aaron's financial analyst valued the 5 companion redemptions at the program's ordinary replacement rate. The amount was modest beside the house and retirement accounts, but the settlement could recognize shared points used without shared consent. Aaron and Paige set temporary rules. Celia would remain in a furnished rental. We would maintain ordinary household expenses while the bungalow was appraised. Neither of us would remove property or create new joint debt without notice. Celia would reimburse the points account at an agreed value during settlement discussions rather than pretending miles could be returned to the exact trips. She would complete medical testing and communicate only through email about the house. Renee was present when Celia retrieved her work equipment from the bungalow on one scheduled afternoon. I told Graham and Nolan separately that Celia had acknowledged both relationships and said there were no others. I did not arrange a group call. They did not need to confront one another to validate what happened. Graham ended his relationship with Celia and cancelled the anniversary reservation. Nolan cancelled Thursday's flight. Those were their decisions, not victories I had engineered. Graham continued running the harvest room. Nolan returned to his work. Neither became my friend. Celia asked for marriage counseling. I agreed to 2 discernment sessions because 19 years deserved a clear decision even if they did not deserve indefinite investigation. In the first session, she described the affairs as compartments. The counselor asked whether compartments were something that happened to her or something she maintained. Celia said she maintained them. She also admitted she had mistaken the absence of immediate conflict for proof that the arrangement was functioning. None of us had confronted her with the whole system because none of us had been allowed to see it. In the second, I asked whether she could offer a version of reconciliation that did not require access to her devices forever. She proposed location sharing, calendar transparency, and no solo travel. I could imagine those rules catching a schedule. I could not imagine them restoring the assumption that the schedule meant what it said. I filed for divorce the next week. My sister Renee asked whether I was certain. I told her certainty was not the same as knowing every detail. I knew enough to decide what I would no longer participate in. We told close relatives that Celia had maintained multiple relationships and we were separating. I did not circulate the calendar photograph. Graham and Nolan were not characters for our family to rank. The house went on the market 5 months later. Celia kept her job. I kept mine. The 3 calendars disappeared from our kitchen display, but the consequence was not that technology exposed a villain. It was that one ordinary screen briefly showed all the promises Celia had worked to keep from touching. The divorce took 14 months. Financial disclosures confirmed the picture Celia had given in the conference room: no hidden property, no secret loans, and no employer-funded vacations, but years of personal spending and joint reward points used inside relationships I had not consented to finance. The settlement accounted for those amounts within the full division of assets. It did not award me every disputed dollar or leave Celia destitute. We sold the bungalow after replacing a leaking garage roof and divided the equity under our agreement. I rented a townhouse near the Fleet Yard. Celia moved to Madison but did not move in with Graham. I learned that only because the address appeared on divorce documents, not because I checked on her. Until the house sold, a temporary agreement covered the mortgage, repairs, and access. We listed every pickup through our attorney so logistics could not become disguised contact. Our longest disagreement concerned my father's socket set, which Celia said he had given us both. Renee found my old purchase receipt, and Celia released the claim. Keeping one object tied to Dad without another invented history mattered more than its price. Our medical results were negative. Relief closed the health question, it did not reopen the marriage. For several months, time itself felt contaminated. Tuesday meant Graham. One Thursday a month meant Nolan. Friday meant the 90-minute buffer before Celia appeared beside me at the banquet. I would look at old photographs and calculate which calendar she had left or entered. That habit produced no new decisions. With a therapist, I learned to separate dates that affected my health, finances, or legal choices from dates that only fed the wish to know which relationship had occupied more of her attention. I kept the first list. I stopped building the second. The distinction followed me to work. I had spent 22 years putting preventive maintenance, inspections, and driver training on schedules because a missed date could take an ambulance or snowplow out of service. After the sink, a green block on the fleet board could make me lose the next sentence in a meeting. I changed the board to gray until a mechanic asked why every job suddenly looked overdue. I changed it back the next morning. Then I read each entry aloud with the crew, unit number, task, responsible technician, deadline. The information matched what everyone had been told. Repetition did not cure me, but it taught my nervous system that coordination and concealment were not the same act. Graham sent one final email 6 months after the sync. He said he had found a key Celia kept at the harvest room and would return it through her attorney. He thanked me for answering the first question honestly and said he did not expect a reply. I did not send one. Nolan wrote once to confirm that his medical testing was clear, then ended contact. Their exits were quieter than their roles in my imagination. No restaurant staff gathered to condemn Celia. No conference organizer exposed her. The consequences that mattered were private people withdrawing consent after receiving the same facts. Celia apologized throughout the divorce. Her first apologies focused on the screen. She was sorry I had seen the calendars without context. Later she apologized for the stories she told Graham and Nolan. Near the end, she said, "I made each of you responsible for a different reason I couldn't decide." That was closer. She had made my grief responsible for Graham's delay, my death responsible for Nolan's trust, and her work responsible for my ignorance. None of those explanations belonged to the people carrying them. I accepted that she understood more than she had at the beginning. I did not treat understanding as repair. Renee knew only the facts that affected our family until I told her what Celia had borrowed from Dad's illness. I did not show her Nolan's messages or ask her to judge the entire marriage. I said that Celia had described Dad's neurological decline as mine and had told another man I was dead. Renee stood at her kitchen sink for a long time, then asked whether Dad's actual medical information had been shared. I told her only the symptoms and the caregiving details I could confirm, not his records. We agreed that if any relative heard a version of the story, we would correct only what concerned Dad and refuse to turn his last year into evidence for public consumption. That boundary protected something the calendars had distorted but did not own. At our final settlement meeting, Celia asked whether I thought any part of our marriage had been real. I said the question was too broad to help either of us. We had cared for my father, paid a mortgage, laughed, fought, traveled, and built a home. Those events happened. The problem was not that every moment was false. It was that I could not know which agreement I was living under because she changed it when she crossed city lines. Celia cried without arguing. She said she understood why I could not keep the house even if she signed away her share. I corrected her. I could have afforded to keep it under the proposed settlement, but I did not want a financial concession to decide where I recovered. Selling it meant neither of us could use the kitchen, the guest room, or the mortgage as a reason to remain involved in the other's life. We signed the final property schedule that afternoon. After the divorce, Renee invited me to help plan a memorial bench for our father at a county park where he used to walk. The project required choosing a Saturday when 6 relatives, a park employee, and a concrete installer could attend. Renee created one shared calendar event and named it Dad's Bench, final date. The first time it appeared on my phone, my stomach tightened at the colored block. I nearly asked her to handle the schedule without me. Then I opened the event. Every invited person was visible. The location was the location. The purpose was the purpose. A calendar had not betrayed me. Celia had used calendars to manage betrayal. That distinction seemed obvious, but it took months before my body believed it. We installed the bench in October. Celia did not attend, and no one used the day to discuss the divorce. Renee brought coffee. My uncle complained about the cold. The installer arrived 17 minutes late and apologized to everyone at once. When we were finished, my family left, and I stayed to tighten one bolt the installer had missed. My father's name was on the plaque, followed by the years he had actually lived. There was no mention of the tremor, the falls, or the night Celia and I had taken turns at his apartment. Those facts were true, but they were not the only measure of him. I remembered him teaching Renee to drive in an empty church lot and showing me how to listen for a failing bearing before it seized. For the first time since Nolan's call, those memories arrived without Celia's false obituary beside them. I sat for a while without checking what Celia might have been doing. At home, the kitchen display from the bungalow sat in a box of property assigned to me. I had reset it during the sale and removed both our accounts according to the manufacturer's instructions. For weeks I considered throwing it away. Instead, I gave it to Renee for her home office after resetting it again in front of her. She laughed and said, "You know I'm going to use this for weather and dentist appointments." "That's fine," I said. "Use it for whatever you tell people you're using it for." The sentence sounded sharper than I intended. Renee waited, then said, "I will." She did not ask me to apologize for the caution. 2 weeks later she sent me a photograph of the display showing rain, a dental cleaning, and nothing else. I smiled, then caught myself trying to imagine what might be hidden from the photograph. I put the phone down before the question became an investigation. A boundary did not require me to pretend deception was impossible. It required me to decide what evidence I had, what decision faced me, and when suspicion had become a habit instead of protection. A year after the sink, she invited me to dinner on a Wednesday and added the event to the family calendar. I saw the notification and accepted it. There was no hidden significance in the button. It simply told her I planned to arrive. At 6:22 that evening, the same minute the wall display had once announced Celia's anniversary, I parked outside Renee's house. She opened the door and said, "Right on time." I almost corrected her because I was 2 minutes early. Then I went inside. One honest schedule could not prove that every future promise would be kept. It did something smaller and more useful. It gave both people the same event, the same purpose, and the chance to choose it with the same facts.